The streets of Rome in the first century were alive with spectacle, power, and paranoia. When Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus rose to the throne in 54 AD, many saw him as a young, promising leader who could restore glory to the empire. At only 16 years old, the boy emperor seemed more interested in poetry and music than politics, more concerned with his art than with conquest. Yet beneath the gilded surface of youth lay the seeds of tyranny, watered by ambition and fear. Nero's path to power was paved with manipulation. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, had schemed relentlessly to secure her son's position as heir to Emperor Claudius. Through poison and political intrigue, she cleared his path, ensuring that Nero, still a teenager, would wear the laurel crown. But Agrippina's triumph soon soured. Once Nero tasted absolute power, he began to resent her control. The boy who owed everything to his mother quickly grew to see her as a threat. By the year 59 AD, Rome was already whispering of Nero's cruelty. When Agrippina criticized his growing affair with a freedwoman and his neglect of duty, the emperor plotted her death. First, he ordered a boat designed to collapse in the night, drowning her in the sea. Agrippina survived the attempt, swimming back to shore. Furious and humiliated, Nero abandoned subtlety. He sent armed men into her villa, where they struck her down with blades. Rome's emperor had killed his own mother, staining the imperial palace with the blood of family. After Agrippina's murder, Nero descended into paranoia. Anyone suspected of disloyalty or ambition became a target. Senators, generals, even his own advisors fell under suspicion. Executions became public displays, often accompanied by cruel methods designed to send a chilling message. Some were forced to open their own veins in front of their families. Others were beaten to death in dungeons beneath the city. Nero called it justice. Rome called it terror. At first, the people still adored him. He staged lavish games and spectacles, spending fortunes on chariot races, gladiatorial contests, and musical performances in which he insisted on starring. He fancied himself not only a ruler, but also Rome's greatest artist. Senators cringed as the emperor sang before them, unable to criticize his talent without risking death. What Nero lacked in political wisdom, he tried to compensate with theater. But the laughter that filled his halls was hollow, born not of admiration, but of fear. The cruelty deepened as rivals rose and fell. Britannicus, the son of Claudius and a true heir to the throne, posed a quiet but dangerous challenge. Nero invited him to a banquet, presenting him with a cup of wine laced with poison. As the boy collapsed in agony, Nero smiled coldly, declaring the death a natural illness. Few believed the lie, but none dared to speak. With Britannicus gone, Nero's rule faced no direct challenge, only the whispers of conspirators who soon found themselves dragged to execution. The imperial palace became a fortress of horror. Spies lingered in every corridor, listening for words of discontent. Accusations spread like wildfire, and torture became a tool of governance. Prisoners were suspended by their limbs, burned with heated irons, or forced to endure cruel devices that crushed bone and spirit alike. Nero relished the suffering, not only for its efficiency, but also for the strange delight it gave him. Rome's ruler was becoming less a statesman and more a sadist. In 62 Nero cast aside his first wife, Octavia, daughter of Claudius. She was loved by the people, a quiet figure who brought a sense of stability to the court. But Nero's lust for Poppaea Sabina, a woman of ruthless ambition, drove him to destroy Octavia. He accused her of adultery, a crime punishable by death. Though no evidence existed, the emperor ordered her banished, then executed. Her head was delivered to Poppaea as a grotesque gift. Rome's citizens wept, but their mourning was silenced by fear. The cruelty reached beyond the palace walls. Nero raised taxes brutally, bleeding the provinces dry to fund his excesses. Cities crumbled under the weight of his demands, while Rome glittered with marble and gold. The emperor's appetite for spectacle was insatiable. He built vast gardens and opened them to the public at night, but these gatherings were lit by the bodies of prisoners, coated in pitch and set ablaze as human torches. The sight horrified some, thrilled others, and etched Nero's name into the annals of infamy. By the time the Great Fire of Rome erupted in 64 AD, the empire was already trembling beneath Nero's heel. The flames tore through the wooden structures of the city, consuming homes, temples, and markets alike. For 6 days, the inferno raged, leaving entire districts in ash. Survivors whispered that Nero himself had ordered the fire, desiring space to build his extravagant palace, the Domus Aurea. Some even claimed they saw him on a balcony, singing as the city burned. Whether truth or rumor, the image of Nero watching Rome's destruction became eternal. When the people turned against him, demanding answers, Nero sought a scapegoat. His gaze fell on the Christians, a small and unpopular sect spreading through Rome. He accused them of setting the fire, branding them enemies of the empire. What followed was one of the first great persecutions of Christians in history. Men, women, and children were rounded up, tortured, and executed in the most barbaric ways. Some were thrown to wild beasts in the arena, others crucified along the roadsides. The night gardens once again glowed with burning bodies, this time believers in Christ. Nero's persecution of Christians was not merely punishment, it was theater. He dressed victims in animal skins, allowing dogs to tear them apart for the amusement of crowds. He ordered crosses erected in rows, turning executions into grim festivals of death. Roman citizens, though uneasy, watched in silence, too terrified to defy the emperor. To protest meant to join the condemned. Nero had turned cruelty into an art form, and the empire trembled beneath the weight of his madness. The tyrant's reign of horror was far from over. With every execution, every burning body, Nero grew more distant from humanity. His love of music, theater, and spectacle merged with his thirst for power and punishment, creating a ruler unlike any Rome had seen before. As the city rebuilt from the ashes of the Great Fire, whispers spread that the empire itself might not survive Nero's hunger for destruction. Rome was wounded, its people scarred, and its emperor drunk on blood. This was only the beginning of his terror. The empire stood on the edge of chaos, and Nero, Rome's artist, tyrant, and executioner, was determined to carve his legacy into history with fire, torture, and fear. The Great Fire of Rome had reduced much of the city to rubble. Families huddled in the streets, their homes reduced to ash, their temples swallowed by smoke. The once mighty capital of the empire resembled a charred graveyard, its people desperate for answers. At the center of this storm stood Nero, a man whose cruelty was already legendary. Rather than comfort his people, he saw opportunity. Nero's dreams of grandeur had long outgrown the imperial palace. He envisioned a new Rome, one that bore his name, one that would shine with gold and marble like a monument to his ego. With the city in ruins, he seized the chance to rebuild. From the ashes of neighborhoods and temples, he laid the foundation for his Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It sprawled like a kingdom within the city, adorned with jewels, artificial lakes, and gardens too extravagant for a ruler who claimed to serve his people. But the whispers of guilt would not vanish. Many Romans believed their emperor had started the fire himself. His enemies in the Senate muttered of madness and megalomania. His people, once dazzled by his gains, began to doubt his loyalty to Rome. To survive, Nero needed a scapegoat, someone to bear the burden of flames he may well have kindled. His eyes turned toward a small, despised group, the Christians. The Christians were already viewed with suspicion. Their refusal to worship Rome's gods branded them outsiders, traitors to tradition. They met in secret, spoke of a single god, and refused to honor the emperor as divine. For Nero, they were perfect targets. He accused them of arson, declaring that these strange followers of Christ had set the city ablaze in defiance of Rome. The lie was convenient, and it fueled his cruelty to new extremes. The arrests began swiftly. Men and women were dragged from their homes, beaten in front of neighbors, and herded into prisons where torture awaited. The accused were chained in dark chambers, interrogated under whips and heated irons. Some were mutilated until they confessed to crimes they did not commit. Others clung to silence, praying even as their flesh was torn. To Nero, their suffering was not punishment but spectacle. He staged their executions with theatrical cruelty. Some Christians were clothed in animal skins and thrown to packs of wild dogs in the arena. The beasts tore them apart as the crowd cheered and recoiled in equal measure. Others were crucified along the roads leading into Rome. Their bodies were left to rot under the sun as a warning to all who might oppose the emperor. Yet the most infamous punishment came at night, when Nero turned prisoners into human torches. The gardens of the Golden House glowed with eerie light as Christians were tied to stakes, covered in pitch, and set aflame. Their screams echoed through the night air, mingling with the laughter of guests invited to the emperor's macabre banquets. Nero, dressed in theatrical robes, wandered among the burning bodies as though admiring lanterns. He told his companions that these flames avenged Rome. To his victims, they were proof of Rome's descent into hell. While the city rebuilt, the empire groaned under Nero's appetite for excess. He demanded tribute from provinces already drained by war and taxation. The wealth poured into Rome, not for the relief of the people, but to fuel Nero's fantasies. Senators who objected were silenced, often forced to take their own lives in elaborate rituals of humiliation. Those who bowed survived, but their loyalty was bought with fear. Rome's politics had become a theater of executions. Among those condemned was Seneca, the philosopher who had once been Nero's tutor. Seneca had guided the boy emperor in his early years, hoping to mold him into a just ruler. But as Nero descended into madness, the teacher became a liability. Accused of conspiracy, Seneca was ordered to commit suicide. In a grim echo of Stoic philosophy, he opened his veins in front of his friends, calmly awaiting death while Rome mourned the loss of its wisdom. The paranoia deepened. Any rumor of rebellion, any whisper of discontent, sent Nero into fits of rage. Conspiracies, both real and imagined, spread through the empire, and the emperor responded with waves of executions. Senators, generals, and even poets fell beneath his wrath. Torture chambers overflowed, the crack of whips and the hiss of iron branding flesh becoming the daily soundtrack of Rome. Mercy was no longer a Roman virtue. It had burned away with the city. Amid this terror, Nero's obsession with art grew grotesque. He forced citizens to attend his performances, threatening punishment for those who failed to applaud. In Greece, he entered competitions, demanding victories regardless of his skill. His ego blurred the line between ruler and performer, until the empire itself seemed like a stage built only for him. Those who dared to leave his plays early or show boredom risked their lives. For Nero, applause was survival. The people endured, but discontent simmered. Farmers struggled under the weight of taxes. Soldiers grumbled about a leader more concerned with costumes than campaigns. In the provinces, governors muttered of rebellion, their patience stretched thin. Yet Nero remained blind to their anger, too enamored with his golden house, too intoxicated by power to notice the cracks in his empire. His cruelty, once feared, was now loathed. The Christians, though broken and bloodied, endured their persecution. For every man burned, another stepped forward to profess faith. Their suffering became a symbol, their courage a quiet defiance against the emperor's wrath. Though Rome mocked them, their stories spread, whispered from prison cells to marketplaces. Nero believed he had crushed them. In truth, he had given their faith a martyr's flame. By 65 AD, the empire trembled under Nero's tyranny. The great city had been rebuilt, but its foundations were soaked in blood. The people no longer whispered of his cruelty. They spoke of it openly, though always in fear of spies. His reign, once gilded with promise, had become synonymous with terror. The tyrant who sang while Rome burned now presided over an empire smoldering with unrest. Yet Nero's hunger for power and cruelty showed no sign of slowing. He believed himself untouchable, a god among men, destined to reshape Rome in his image. But beneath the surface, conspiracies festered. Soldiers plotted, senators schemed, and provinces prepared for revolt. The empire had suffered his fire and endured his torches, but history was beginning to shift. Nero's tyranny had turned Rome into a stage of fear, but even the cruelest play must someday end. The emperor's descent into madness would soon collide with the fury of his people, and the echoes of fire and torture would blaze again this time. Against him. By 65 AD, Rome was weary of Nero's cruelty. The Great Fire, the endless executions, and the persecution of Christians had drained the empire's spirit. Even his closest allies began to plot in secret, whispering of rebellion in corridors where spies lingered. The emperor's paranoia grew, and the more he feared betrayal, the more he tortured, executed, and silenced those around him. One of the most famous attempts to topple Nero was the Pisonian conspiracy. Led by the senator Gaius Calpurnius Piso, it brought together senators, equestrians, and even members of Nero's guard. Their plan was to assassinate the emperor and restore dignity to Rome. But betrayal struck. Again word reached Nero before the plot could unfold. His response was swift and merciless. Dozens were executed, their bodies displayed as warnings. Those of higher rank, like Piso himself, were ordered to take their own lives. Perhaps the most tragic loss was Seneca's ally Lucan, a poet whose verses once celebrated Rome. Forced to bleed out, he recited his own poetry with his final breaths. The empire mourned its stinkers, but fear silenced their grief. Nero's grip, though bloody, held strong for now. Yet cracks widened across the empire. The provinces grew restless, taxed to their limits while Nero wasted fortunes on theaters and palaces. Soldiers in Gaul and Spain began to question their loyalty. Governors, once obedient, weighed rebellion against survival. Nero, blind to the storm gathering around him, continued his performances, believing applause was more powerful than armies. By 68 A, the patience of the empire had shattered. Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of Gaul, rose in revolt. His defiance inspired others, including Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania, who declared himself emperor. Rome's legions began to shift allegiance, sensing that Nero's reign was nearing its end. For the first time, the tyrant's throne trembled. When news of the revolts reached Rome, Nero panicked. He fantasized about fleeing to Egypt, where he could live as an artist, free from Rome's judgment. But his guards deserted him, and his advisors abandoned their loyalty. Even the Senate, once silenced by terror, declared him a public enemy. The man who had ruled as a god now found himself utterly alone. Nero fled the city under cover of night, accompanied by only a handful of slaves. He wandered in desperation, trembling at the thought of capture. The once proud emperor who had burned Christians in his gardens now feared a death too humiliating to endure. He begged his companions to take his life, but none dared raise a blade against him. At last, Nero reached a villa on the outskirts of Rome. With his pursuers closing in, he realized the end was inevitable. "What an artist dies in me," he whispered, lamenting not his cruelty, but his lost glory. With trembling hands and the aid of a servant, he drove a dagger into his throat. The tyrant of Rome had fallen not by the sword of rebellion, but by his own despair. News of his death spread swiftly. Crowds that once feared his wrath now poured into the streets, not in mourning, but in relief. The Golden House stood unfinished, a monument to arrogance and cruelty. Rome had endured his fire, his torches, and his tyranny. And now the empire breathed again, though scarred forever by his reign. The legacy of Nero was not one of greatness, but of infamy. His name became synonymous with madness and cruelty, a warning etched into history's memory. He had watched Rome burn, tortured its people, and silenced its thinkers. And in the end, the emperor who thought himself divine was remembered not as a god, but as a monster. Subscribe to the channel for more interesting content like this.